welcome everyone to another broadcast of The Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst radio network. All past broadcasts are podcasts. Find them at ArtistFirst.com. We welcome your questions and comments. Please use DJ at ArtistFirst.com. And now here they are. It's Michael and Margaret Lyons.
Thank you very much, Seaman, and I'm Michael Lyons.
And I'm Margaret.
And tonight we are going to do Prison Series Part 4.
Yes.
We're going back up the river.
What traps you?
What traps you? We're going to do the prison of guilt. Not guilt.
Oh.
But guilt. And we're going to do it from the perspective of atonement or At-One-Ment. But we just, on the way in, realized that we could do Hopa Hoppa Hippo as well. Right? Or whatever it is. Hopa Hoppa Hopa Heap Hippa Filter.
Are you?
How do you say it?
Are you talking about the Hawaiian way of dealing with relationships?
Yeah. How's it go?
Okay. It's ho'o, pono, pono, ho'opono, pono.
That's what I said. Hopa Hoppa Hippo. Anyway. Yep, that's going to be fun today. So I'm sorry.
Please forgive me.
Please forgive me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I love you.
I love you. That's hopa let's just go on. Pono. So, but tonight we're going to talk about that and about atonement. It's appropriate because we've just come out of the Day of Atonement, if anyone celebrates that out there. But regardless, the prison of guilt, and guilt oftentimes will truly imprison people. There are few things that will cripple you more than an overwhelming sense of guilt and its accompanying sense of shame.
True.
There are tremendous, psychological implications for an overwhelming sense of guilt. You can, I believe, one of the side effects is that you can develop basically a psychosis or a neurosis or a complex, if you will, over a sense of guilt. Oftentimes, people who suffer from PTSD have an overwhelming sense of guilt for having survived a particularly heinous, situation, and have had others who did not survive, and they have survivor's guilt, which is, which can be crippling. And the prison, it's sort of another one of these prisons of the mind, or the ego, who's the jailer here, loves guilt, because guilt is a way for the ego to reinforce its domination of the consciousness, or to take the consciousness. Tolle says, that anxiety and fear are too much future, and guilt and shame are too much past. He means too much living in the future. That's anxiety and fear and all the stress of not knowing. And then too much in the past, worry. It's more more common, exactly. And then you have living in the past, which is living in the throes of guilt, regret, shame. And Tolle, he doesn't do atonement because he doesn't believe in living in the past or the future, but to live in the endless present moment of now, accept that you have done bad things, but you don't live or you don't dwell upon them, nor do you worry about the future. It's either too much future and not enough, as he says, presence, and the same thing with the past. So, but rather than come at this from the perspective of Eckhart, because he just eschews the question, we're going to go somewhere we haven't gone very often, which is Fyodor Dostoyevsky. Dostoyevsky, because, you know.
Well, for Tolle,
yeah,
atonement is basically coming back to your consciousness, becoming one again.
That's true.
Okay, so he would rather that you not dwell in that state of guilt and realize that you must come back to consciousness. And when you do that, that is your atonement. That's his definition.
Yeah. I mean, that's great. I mean, if you break the word apart, we broke it apart in what we wrote up and will be on the website, is At-One-Ment. But in this sense, in Tolle's sense, because I love the way you just put that, you're becoming one with your presence rather than torn apart into fragments of, you know, pain body or whatever left in the past, or fear and anxiety, which is throwing your throwing away the present moment and putting yourself into the endless worry of what will happen, what could happen, So the atonement, the becoming one with oneself, is truly Tolle's take on it.
Yes, he says these things, doesn't necessarily show you how to get there.
True.
But the concept of making good for something that you feel guilty about is something that every human being has felt. Because firstly, you've got to admit that you were wrong in some way. And that you have transgressed, you have hurt someone. It's not something that you would be proud of. And that feeling of, oh, what have I done? I have to make good on this, reparation in some way. How do you do that? And why can't I speak?
Dostoyevsky. You have to kind of put it like this.
Oh.
If you kind of roll, and then you could, and Dostoyevsky just rolls off your tongue like that.
Okay. Do you want to read the quote?
No.
Okay.
You read the quote.
Okay.
I can't talk like Igor for the rest of the show, but I'm not going to.
Okay.
Okay.
I can't talk like that at all. All right. The quote is, accept suffering and achieve atonement through it. That is what you must do. Dostoyevsky.
I mean, we talked about it a little bit. You just went through it, but if we do it a little sort of slowly. Guilt is it's sort of an intensely human emotion, and it's a reflective emotion, and or it's not an emotion. I should take that. It's a reflective state of mind, and the reflection here isn't deep introspection. The reflection is of the form of, I wouldn't like that to have been done to me.
Let me just ask you a question then, just on definition. So if guilt is not the emotion, is it shame that's the emotion?
Technically, neither one are emotions, but they're a blend of anxiety or fear and sadness. And you can see this is Paul Ekman's research. So just to kind of give a
I just want to make sure we have the definitions
right. So the seven universal emotions are called so because they have a universal human expression for each one of them, and it's they are. The universality is because the nerves that are used, the actual physiological expression of this emotion in the body is common to all human beings. Okay. That's what it means. That's what universal means. However, many cultures have, or I would say all cultures have these ideas of guilt and shame, but there isn't a universal expression of them. So the expression of guilt and the expression of shame, there are very common ones. You know, hanging. You've heard of the expression of hanging your head, looking down and away, not being able to meet somebody's eyes. These are all variations of guilt and shame. If you feel guilty, you may look down, you may look away, your voice may get softer, but they aren't universal, and they're reflective in the sense that you have to realize that you've offended somebody. One of the things that makes psychopaths difficult to detect is they have no innate sense of guilt. They can do heinous things and feel no shame because they don't have a internal reflective sense. They're literally missing a certain component of their brain, which is the parasympathetic nervous system. Technically, just to go into it for 2 seconds, the parasympathetic nervous system is what makes you, when you look at someone and they're smiling, you feel happy. Well, you think that's weird, right? Because they're smiling and you feel happy, because there's a feedback loop. It works two different ways. When you see happy people, you feel happy. When you see sad people, you feel sad. Also, interestingly enough, when you smile, even when you're not happy, you feel happy. The chemicals and the structures and nerve pathways in the brain, which are associated with happiness, will get activated by just literally pasting a smile on your face.
Interesting.
It's a very interesting thing. So there's and these are extremely deeply entrenched physiological components of the nervous system. A lot of them are tied to the vagus nerve.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. This must be a vagus nerve.
Well, or the other cranial nerves. You know, the facial expressions. Almost all of them are tied directly to cranial nerves, which are the original nervous system, the pre-spinal cord, the pre-vertebral cord nervous system, which is still part of our physiology, are the cranial nerves, which go directly to the brain. So you have the optic nerve, you have the auditory nerve, you have a lot of the different facial nerves. Bell's palsy is a paralysis of one of the facial nerves, which is why it shows up as one side of your face being disanimate versus the other one moving. So these various, and the vagus nerve is called such because it wanders throughout the whole body and it connects the mesentery, which is part of your digestive system, with your brain, and it's why people say, you think with your gut. So your whole gut, which was part of your original physiology, very ancient physiology of invertebrates and vertebrates, your gut, your sense of taste and smell, your sense of vision, are all tied together into these very, very deep structures, these cranial nerves, and they go into the deep structures of the brain. So they go into the autonomic nervous system and this parasympathetic nervous system. So now this is all, the physiology of it.
But this is how emotion impacts the physical body, and you being the recipient of it, you're actually feeling all of this.
Yes.
And it's very interesting because other people will come with you and feel the same thing. That's what the research has discovered. I always was intrigued by when someone's laughing and other people suddenly they start laughing for no reason because one person's laughing.
Mm.
You know, and how they say, oh, laughter is contagious.
Right.
Well, it's an expression of happiness or joy, which is, happiness is an emotion.
Yes.
So when you think of it that way, that your emotions are ways or avenues in which you can communicate without words. And it's a wonderful thing to think about, because if you are engaging in a relationship or a conversation with someone, people love to share the experience, and it usually means sharing the emotions of the moment.
Yes.
So it's a fuller way of being.
You know, if you this is something which you can practice on your own. When you are speaking on the telephone, but this is another medium when we're speaking on the radio. If you smile while you're speaking, people can detect that your voice carries the emotion of happiness.
Mm-hmm.
If you are angry, or if you have an angry expression on your face, people can detect that in your voice. Now, they're not in your presence, but there's an energetic projection of emotion through all of your through your physiology into the universe. So you've probably heard Margaret just mentioned infectious laughter, contagious laughter, but anger is contagious too. If you have one angry person, it can become an angry mob. Similarly, if somebody is down and depressed, you feel that. You feel that they're down. You say, what's the matter? Are you feeling down? They haven't said a word, and you didn't even have to as well. You can, especially if you have a relationship with somebody, you can walk into the room and you feel their emotional state. You know if you walk into the room when somebody's PO'd at you, you know. And similarly, you know if you walk into a room and somebody's upset. Okay, so we have these, call them senses for the energy of the other. And this works, it doesn't just work human to human. You know when an animal, and not necessarily always a domestic animal, whether you have a sense of whether they're going to attack or whether they're going to just leave you alone. And there are lots of people who will tell you that if you want to handle a dangerous animal, you have to have a particular energy. Cesar Millan is always talking about the energy that you're projecting. So if you want to lead a pack of dogs, you have to project the alpha energy. They don't sense the words. The words don't mean anything. The words are for you. The dogs feel your energy. Mm-hmm. And so there's a very basic interaction among probably even invertebrates, but let's say certainly among vertebrates, among animals in general, where you can,
Yeah, no, the energy is calm and assertive.
Mm.
It's not, because when people say alpha, the tendency is to believe that it's got to be the most angry person in the room.
Mm.
And it's not. It's just the most calm, assertive person, mostly because people trust that whoever that calm, assertive person is taking the welfare of everyone into account.
Mm.
It's a trust thing.
But it's an energy thing, because we trust our senses to carry that information to us. So you probably had the experience of having to lead, and if you're a good leader and you have to lead, you can't be frantic. You can't be just domineering. These aren't good leadership tactics. You have to be someone, again, who, as Margaret just said, you have to be calm. The leader in a situation is the person who remains calm and takes into account the current situation that you're in, what can be done, what can't be done, and wants to project that energy into the group, especially if you're leading a bunch of people who are stressed and maybe on the edge of panic, and you give them the sense of surety. You have to say, situation's bad, but it's going to be okay. We have to keep our heads. We have to think. We have to take into account what we can do and what we can't do. And already you can start to feel, you start to say these words, or you start to project this energy, and you can feel the tension in the room start to go down. Okay. No, if you start to panic, the mind goes. The actions become chaotic. Fear rises, and the situation gets worse, almost generally, immediately worse. Also with anger. Anger can inject too much energy. It can make people afraid. So this, we've kind of gone off on a little bit of a tangent here, but these emotions, these energies, when you talk about guilt, it's a reflective sort of state. You're reflecting the fact that you wouldn't have want this done to you, and you know it's wrong. So guilt also has a sort of a let's call it a moral or a judgment component. You're judging yourself to be wrong. Mm-hmm. There's always judgment. To judge others is another thing. You put yourself into the role of judging. But guilt is a judgment of self. You look at yourself, and this is where the ego comes in. It says, you're wrong. The ego loves to say who's wrong, even if it's you. So the ego puts you into the situation of you're wrong, and you have to kind of, and this is Dostoyevsky, you have to accept that. You have to say, yeah, I'm wrong, and I'm going to have to do something to make up for it. So now this realization also comes along with it, a sort of penalty.
A correction.
A correction is necessary. The simple thing is, you do something quite by accident and you cause damage. It's not enough. It's when you're a child, or when you're somebody who can't be, couldn't be held to account. You can say, well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do it. And you get let off the hook. But once you've assumed your majority, once you've assumed the responsibilities of your actions, you even have to take responsibility for unintended actions, because the consequences are still real. I didn't mean to do that, but I accept that this was my action. Unintentional harm still requires atonement. You've wronged the other without intent. But still, we recognize that it is still an action which you took and caused harm. And the adult portion of you, the portion of you which has to realize that, says, I accept responsibility for all of my actions, intended or not. It's when you see, Margaret, there's been many famous cases, one more recently in the news, where someone caused the unintentional death of another using a firearm. The tendency, of course, is to say, well, I didn't mean to, it's not me that... all that is incorrect.
You want to distance yourself from
but the true stand-up person says, yeah, I never meant to do that, but I did it. I'm guilty. Mm-hmm. I don't care if the technical, technically I could be said to be not responsible. Your actions caused grievous harm, or in this case, death.
Well, most
you have to take responsibility.
Yeah. No, I mean, in the old world, it was always a life for a life.
Yeah. Eye for an eye.
It didn't matter if it was deliberate or not. Mm-hmm. It was always a life for a life.
You owed somebody a life debt.
Yes. And most people say, well, I didn't mean to. All right. And that is, as you said, if you were a child, that would be one thing. But as an adult, at your hand, you have done something horrendous. And you've got to own up to it. There's no excuses for yourself, because if you try to make the excuse of, well, I really, really didn't mean it and I don't want to get punished for it. And frankly, that's the state of affairs whenever anybody does something wrong. That's the immediate response. But that's also the child's response.
Yeah.
Are you responsible for yourself or not? Do you have the strength of character to say, I was terribly wrong, and feel how wrong it actually is with what you have done? Now, if you're a sociopath or a psychopath, you're not going to feel anything.
No.
Which is, to me, quite amazing. And people who have a soul and have the ability to empathize with others, that doesn't even register. It's like, what do you mean you don't understand? How is that possible?
Well, it's truly in this case, a psychopath, a physiological defect.
And at that point, you're like, okay, so that basically means that even more, this person needs to atone for it, because he doesn't feel that he's done anything wrong, but he has.
Yeah.
And he has to register that he has done something wrong. And if you can't do it yourself, then something from the outside is going to have to show you that that is wrong.
Right. I mean, if we just take 2 minutes on what you just said, which is when you're a child, the bright line that you cross, and every culture has this line, but the bright line you cross between childhood and adulthood is the responsibility for your actions. And the line which has become blurred is that people want to be treated as adults, but yet don't want to be held to account.
Right.
And the excuse which you make, which is, I didn't mean to, which is that old, the road to hell is paved by, those with good intentions. My intentions were honorable, but the responsibility means that reality is the final arbiter. If you act or don't act, and there's oftentimes you'll see that through your inaction allowed somebody to come to harm versus even action. The meaning of majority versus the minority, and by that I mean, if you're a minor or you're an adult, the meaning of having your majority is that you're responsible for that which happens by your hand or that which you could have done and didn't do. And it's an awesomely great responsibility. And it's one of the reasons why when you have this, let's say you're given a car and you're going to drive, regardless of what your intentions were, the fact that you're piloting the vehicle that causes harm means that you're responsible. And to not take that responsibility means that you aren't ready for that responsibility. And in the case of a psychopath, you can never be given that responsibility because you have no capacity for that responsibility. Right.
And that's always a very difficult path to walk. I mean, in general, as human beings, you are made higher than the animals, but lower than God. In other words, you aren't God and you're not an animal. You're somewhere in between. And what we've been finding in this society is that distinction, the lines between those two have been blurred. People are being encouraged to follow more animalistic responses, or the other side of that is they are gods. They decide everything. The whole world revolves around them. And I find that fascinating that those lines, both up and down, have been blurred. What does that mean you are? How have you defined yourself as a human being? And if a society is blurring those lines, that means that you have no place that is different than your idea of God or your idea of animal. At that point, the animals and gods are the same thing.
Right. They're both ways of abdicating responsibility.
Mm-hmm. And not appreciating the fact that as a human being, you have something very, very different from the animals and from God.
Well, and just to put a fine point on it, assuming your majority means that you not only take full responsibility for your own actions, intended or not, but you look to others with the same level of account, which means that what you do for another or what you don't do for another, which causes harm, is on your account. And that other's actions, you're depending on this is the societal contract. You're depending that they also take all of their actions with that same level of account. So when you break it,
it's reciprocal.
It's reciprocal, but it's when you break it, when your actions are held to account, but the actions of the other are either judged to be, as you said, animalistic, so therefore they couldn't help it, or they're gods, and therefore whatever they do is right regardless, you break the societal contract.
Mm-hmm.
And you tear the ability to atone or to receive and give forgiveness, to have responsibility. You can't have single-sided responsibility, is what I'm trying to say.
What you're doing is you're breaking the trust.
Yes.
For another individual, which breaks down interactions for a society.
Yeah.
You can't run a society unless there's some trust involved.
Right.
And breaking that down is a sure way to break down any society, to destroy it.
The mutual responsibility, mutual levels of responsibility, and parity of responsibility is central to a society. And without it, you break it down. You know what we should break down, though, at this point? We should go take a break and go back to the studio for a little bit. But this has been an engaging discussion. We'll come back on the other side, and we'll talk more about the prison of guilt. But let's go back and have a little break.
Listening to The Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst Radio Network. Back to your hosts, Michael and Margaret Lyons.
That was appropriately dark. I like that.
Okay.
Well, we were talking just a little bit on the break, Mark, but you want to bring that question back up, which is between the difference. What makes guilt and shame?
Yeah. What is the definition, then, of guilt and shame if it is not an emotion?
Right. It's easy to confuse them, but guilt and shame are not emotions because they have a societal component. They have mores. A good example would be that if your society says that a certain thing is wrong, and you do that thing, then you will feel guilt about it. But if you are in another society where that thing is not only not something that anyone's ashamed about, but in fact it's a part of everyday life, you could use the example, very sort of over-the-top example. If you are in a society where cannibalism is the norm, then doing that, it carries no guilt, no shame. But in a society where it is the mores of the society are that this is incredibly wrong, and there are many different things. They call them taboos or mores, so guilt and shame have a judgment component. You judge yourself to be wrong. That's guilt, and that's shame. You say, I feel guilty. I feel guilty because your internal sense and your egoic voice says that what you've done is wrong. So there's a wrongness to it.
What is the difference, though, between the shame and the guilt?
This is it's a sort of a subtle point. Shame is often referred to as an internal feeling of dis-ease, of unease with your actions, and you don't know that it's overt yet. So feeling shame, the other way around. Feeling shame is that it is overt. You right. Feel shame because someone has called you out on an action, which is, I said them backwards. So shame is that your action has become known. I am ashamed of my action because others know that I am wrong. Guilt is an internal. I feel guilty, but maybe nobody knows yet.
Oh, how interesting.
Okay, so guilt is a reflective internal feeling of I am wrong. I feel guilty. But shame means that other people know I'm wrong. So that usually your face, if you feel ashamed, your face will color. You'll look down. You'll stare at your feet. You'll shove. You'll get nervous. These are all because others are looking at you and judging you to be wrong. So once your guilt has become known, you feel ashamed of it. But you can immediately feel guilty because who knows you're wrong? You know you're wrong, and that's what people always say. Well, even if nobody knows that I did something wrong, I feel guilty. So guilt will give you that idea of internally judging yourself to be wrong. And
so, in that sense, you basically feel guilt when you're acknowledging that, okay, I've done something wrong. But shame is something that you've wronged the society, the people around you.
Shame will come when others know, when it's revealed to others that you've done something wrong, because now what you're feeling at that point is that I am less than. Shame always looks like I am less than. You look down. You won't meet anyone's eyes. You feel as though you are lesser. You are.
So you're receiving or acknowledging that, yes, I've done wrong, and now I feel less than everybody else.
In others' eyes is the key. Is that in the eyes of the society or in the eyes of the other, when you go up to somebody,
you have become less than.
You're admitting that you have done something wrong. So shame is a consequence of admitting that you're wrong. So if you do something wrong and nobody knows, there's not shame, there's guilt. If you do something wrong and somebody now knows and calls you on it, you can feel ashamed of those actions because you say, well, I'm less than. If you accept them, people, again, this is going to psychopaths or people who are narcissists and other types of personality disorders, reject shame. They reject the feeling that they've done anything wrong, because in their own internal, see, again, that's where this kind of mores or moral compass comes in. They don't have one.
How interesting. So narcissists don't feel shame.
No, they do not, because
Can they feel guilt?
Well, there's degrees of narcissism, and they get to the point of clinical issues. And a clinical narcissist, or somebody who's on that spectrum, that narcissism spectrum, or that spectrum all the way up to psychopathy, which is truly a physiological issue. But sociopaths and narcissists don't feel shame and guilt because they feel that they've put themselves in the position, as you said, of gods. Everything I do is right no matter what, regardless. Right. I admit no external judgment.
So nothing else matters except what I am.
And you have to batter your way through the narcissist's shell to get them to be ashamed and guilty. And you can never get and you can never get through a psychopath's shell because they don't have the ability to.
There is no world except theirs.
Right, and they're lacking the parasympathetic
interesting
connection. So guilt and shame, though, in normal people. Let's talk about normal people for a second. Normal people who are raised with a certain moral compass in a society. So this is why it's in a society. They do something which the society has said is wrong. You have to be trained to be guilty about something. Children aren't guilty about anything. You train them to say, well, this is wrong, this is why. And then they assume they're majority, and they do something which is wrong, and they feel guilty about it. And then if they're stand-up people, they may say, you train yourself to say, I admit that what I did was wrong, and I feel ashamed of my actions. And that comes from the realization that you've wronged another, as we're talking through our phrasing here. And then you have to say, all in that same gestalt, but it may take some time, you have to say, well, I want to make up for this. I broke your window, I dented your car, I did something that damaged you in some way, but you are just as much of a human being as I am. I wouldn't want this done to me. I would want somebody to make it up. You may be forgiven. You may have to do nothing. But the point is you say, I am guilty. I admit my actions or inactions caused harm. I wish to make up for it. I will do X or Y or Z. Or you say to somebody, I'll do whatever you want. I just want to make up for what I've done, right? This is, you say, I'll do whatever it takes to make up for this. Because that's your own internal sense of saying, I wish to somehow make this right. Now, oftentimes there's no way to make something quote unquote right, but the sentiment is still extremely important. And then you have to be, and this is the opportunity we talked about in the prison of unforgiveness. This is where the other has to say, yes, I forgive you, or I will accept your admission of guilt and your willingness to make it right, even if it cannot be. This is sort of the art of it. You can't always make it right. You can't just fix something. Sometimes things are broken beyond repair, but yet you have to offer. And Margaret talked about it last half hour of the Mosaic law, an eye for an eye. You say a life for a life. You say, I killed your son. From now on, I'm your son. I'll do whatever it is your son would have done. I know I can't be your son, but you own me. My life is no longer mine because it's forfeit. The societies used to have this idea of a life debt. And if you transgressed so greatly, your life was forfeit. And that might mean a lifetime of servitude, or it might be that you actually literally had to give up your life. And then the atonement, the realignment, is going back into the mores of the society and getting back into the good graces of those who you wronged, or if you have distanced yourself from your God or your Savior or from Spirit, you realign. You are forgiven. You make some sort of amends, and you are now back within the good graces of the other. because they're equal to you. In this case, this is what we said before. This presupposes a society where everybody takes responsibility, and then if I wrong you, I will atone, and if you wrong me, similarly. But if you have, narcissists or those who wish to never be held to account in an animalistic way, you can't have a society with those type of elements because there is no reciprocal arrangement. Societies are all about reciprocal arrangements, in essence.
It reminds me of the story of Gandhi, where a Hindu man had come to him and he was so angry because he said that he had killed, let me backtrack. I believe the story was that his child had been killed by a Muslim, so he had gone and killed a Muslim child.
Yeah.
Again, that law of eye for an eye kind of thing, well, it's a child for a child. And he went to Gandhi saying, what do I do? Because he was feeling awful about the whole thing. And Gandhi said, you go and you find a Muslim child and take him in and raise him. That is your atonement. And he did do it, and he was raising this boy as his own, but he was a different religion. But it didn't matter because he began to love this child.
Mm-hmm.
But what Dostoyevsky said, accept suffering and achieve atonement through it. So yes, he was suffering, and he realized he was suffering, and he knew he needed to find a way to get through this and make it right. So Gandhi was the one who had given him that path. But yes, it is as tough as that.
Yeah. And I think that there's a appropriateness to the level of action. What I mean by that is, if you've wronged somebody so desperately, taken away their life or taken away something incredibly precious to them, a child, the atonement has to be commensurate. And we feel that as a human being, that at least the offer of something of equal value, it can't ever be the same. His son will never be brought back to life. But that idea of life. A life for a life, yes, of an eye for an eye, it's really value for value. And that if I've wronged you so desperately that nothing, even up to and including my life, will do, then my life is yours. Now, you may say, I don't want your life. I forgive you. But without true forgiveness, the debt remains. And so atonement and forgiveness are hand in hand, but one is the action, and it's several actions, several things where you realize that you have done something wrong, and you offer an appropriate level of value in response, because you're of a majority.
Well, at this point, it had to do with a soul value.
Yeah.
His soul needed to come to a point of peace. And that kind of action speaks volumes to a soul. It's like, okay, this loss of children's lives, this is horrendous. Got to do something. Got to make it right.
And the interesting thing, Margaret, is that's the prison of guilt.
Yes.
And the way out is the narrow door. the narrow door of atonement. So the prison of guilt, you can, if you wish to live with your guilt, if you will, life could become unbearable.
Mm-hmm.
The reason being is that internally, that prison of guilt means that you are unable to take any joy in any new thing, because that truly your life's force has been encapsulated or captured to the extent that you have wronged another and taken that value away from them. People will say, this is just that I can never have another peaceful day with this guilt, with this burden of guilt on me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, no one may ever know, but yet internally, in the ego, again, egoically, pain body, to use Tolle's terms, the pain body egoically knows that your joy and your fulfillment and everything about you which you would love to have at ease and to be in presence is captured by the prison of guilt. The only way out is through the narrow door.
Mm-hmm.
And to come back into the present moment, to realign, as Tolle says, to atone and no longer live in the past.
Yes. Well, not to return back to that underlying feeling of guilt.
Right.
Or the what it has brought as a baseline to color your everyday existence, your moment to moment, you suddenly still have this.
Right.
Even if you try to shove it under the table, it's going to affect you. And to be free is something that you begin to truly wish for. It's like, what can I do? What can I do to be free of this burden?
Yeah, we've all heard the expression that I felt so guilty. I had to admit, the murderer admits the crime because it was driving. It's like the telltale heart.
Oh,
Poe's
heartbeat.
Poe's famous story. The heartbeat is an analog of guilt. In essence, the heart couldn't be beating, but yet the guilt within this person's psyche was driving them mad.
Mm-hmm.
And people will come and admit their guilt and say, I feel so much better now, because internally the turmoil, the prison, the knowing you did something wrong, even if no one else knows, accepting that in your majority, without expressing that and accepting the suffering, accepting the shame, accepting that realizing that you have wronged another, there's no way out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Except through these steps.
Right.
So this prison, and interestingly enough, Margaret, unless you get at least to the realization portion, you can't even be forgiven properly. Sure. Somebody can forgive you and relieve themselves of the burden of unforgiveness, but internally the guilty person may suffer regardless, even if you don't hold them, hold them as guilty in your heart.
In their
own, they're in a prison. So the action of atonement, and to get to that stage, I think we ran into one of these quotes. Byron says the first step, Lord Byron, is to realize you need to atone. In other words, the realization that you've done something wrong is the very first step on the road.
Right. And that is part of the Ho'oponopono, where...
I'm not going to even try this time.
Where you say, I am sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you, because your apology is received, and you are forgiven. Thank you. And I love you.
Which is the realignment.
Well, it's understanding that you and the other are actually the same.
The one.
And you are not going to be at rest until you make it right and apologize and have it received.
And with that, we're sorry. I'm sorry. And it's the end of the hour.
Well, please forgive us.
Please forgive us.
And we have to say our goodbyes.
Yes, I'm Michael Lyons.
And I'm Margaret. Thank you for listening.